wind screamed across the frozen ridge range, as if the mountains themselves were warning him to turn back. Elias Carson leaned forward in the saddle, squinting through the white wall of snow that swallowed every shape, every shadow, every sign of the world he knew. Even Thunderbolt, the stallion who feared nothing, tossed his head with restless unease. The storm had grown too fast, too vicious, far more than the usual Wyoming winter tantrum. Elias felt it in his bones. Something was wrong out here tonight. Then he saw it. At first, it looked like a piece of torn cloth thrashing in the wind. But Thunderbolt halted on his own, the way a horse freezes when it senses something living beneath the snow. Elias slid off the saddle, boots sinking deep, and moved closer with his hand on his knife. Not out of hostility, but caution. In storms like this, clarity died fast. Hope died faster. The shape wasn't cloth. It was a woman. She lay twisted on her side, her face half buried, her dark hair frozen into painful knots against her skin. Her breath came out in weak clouds, barely forming before the wind tore them away. And next to her, pressed against her shivering body, were 3 newborn foals. Slick, trembling, their tiny muzzles nudging at her shoulder as if begging her to rise just one more time. Elias didn't ask how any of this was possible. Not now. Not in this cold. He moved on instinct, the kind that had saved him more times than luck ever had. "Stay with me," he muttered, voice nearly stolen by the wind, as he lifted the woman into his arms. She was limp, frighteningly light, and colder than the snow around her. He wrapped his coat around her and secured her to Thunderbolt's saddle, then gathered each foal in his arms, tucking them against his chest. Their bodies were hot, too hot for newborns left in a blizzard. He didn't understand it. He only knew they were fighting to live, and so was she. Thunderbolt started forward through the storm, hooves punching deep tracks in the snow. Elias kept his head low, shielding the foals as best he could, and forced the horse to keep moving toward the faint outline of his ranch, somewhere beyond the collapsing world of white. Every gust felt like a hand, pushing them back, trying to rip the woman and the foals from his arms. He didn't let it. By the time the ranch's fence appeared through the snow, Elias could barely feel his fingers. The barn stood dark, the cabin dim, but both were still there, solid, waiting, ready to shelter whoever reached them alive. He handed the foals into a blanket-lined trough near the stove, then carried the woman inside, laying her gently on the cot beside the fire. He worked quickly, boots off, layers peeled away, blankets wrapped tight around her. He checked her pulse, weak but steady. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Only when he lit the lantern beside the bed did he finally see her face clearly. She was young, too young to have been left for dead in a storm. Her features carried the unmistakable heritage of the northern tribes. Strong cheekbones, full lashes, a pride even unconsciousness couldn't erase. But there was something else too. A shadow. Something hunted. The foals cried out from the other room. Small, desperate sounds that didn't belong in a world this cold. Elias hurried back to them and was struck speechless. Their coats shimmered faintly in the firelight, as if dusted with something metallic. Silver. Gold. Something unearthly. Their eyes were impossibly bright for newborns, their breaths rhythmic and unnaturally strong. "What in God's name are you?" he whispered, though a part of him felt the answer wasn't his to demand. Hours passed before the woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, heavy with pain and exhaustion. She looked around the cabin, confusion giving way to fear the moment she tried to sit up. Elias stepped forward, hands raised in reassurance. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Storm nearly took you. I found you out by North Ridge." He paused. "I'm Elias Carson, You're at my ranch." Her breathing steadied, but her gaze flicked around the room as if expecting danger to materialize from the shadows themselves. "The foals," she whispered, her voice raw. "Are they—" "They're alive," Elias answered, "stronger than they should be." Relief softened her face for a heartbeat, but it vanished just as quickly, swallowed by dread. She swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have brought me here," she said, barely above a breath. "He'll come." Elias felt the air tighten. "Who?" She closed her eyes, and the name came out like a curse. Caleb Maddox. The name meant nothing to Elias at first. Just another man. But the way she said it, fear wrapped in hatred, made him understand instantly that whoever Caleb Maddox was, he wasn't merely dangerous. He was relentless. She tried sitting up again, gripping Elias's arm when the room spun. "You don't understand," she said urgently. "Those foals, they're spirit mares, the last of them. Maddox will hunt them to the ends of the earth. He'll kill anyone protecting them." Elias studied her, the fire crackling between them. He didn't believe in legends. He didn't believe in spirits roaming the mountains. But he believed in cruelty. He'd seen enough of that in men to recognize the truth in her eyes. The storm outside thundered against the cabin walls, but inside, something colder settled into the room. Danger wasn't coming. It had already begun. The fire snapped sharply, sending brief sparks into the dim cabin air, as if reacting to the weight of the name that had just been spoken. Outside, the blizzard raged on. But inside, the silence thickened. Elias sat across from Lena, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Her breaths were shallow, her shoulders trembling beneath the blankets. Yet there was something fierce in her posture. A woman shattered, yes, but not broken. Not yet. Thunderbolt stomped in the barn outside, restless. The three foals rustled softly in their makeshift bedding, their strange, shimmering coats catching the glow from the cracked open door. Every sound felt louder than it should, as if the storm itself were listening for what came next. Lena's eyes lingered on the fire before she finally spoke again. "My people believed the spirit mares were born from storms like this," she said quietly. "Lightning, wind, breath of the mountains. That's what the elders said." She rubbed her hands together, warming her fingers. "But we also knew they were rare. So rare that some people thought they were only stories." She paused, as if holding her breath against memories sharp enough to cut. 3 weeks ago, my tribe found signs, hoof prints that glowed faintly under the moon. My grandmother knew immediately. She said the cycle was starting again. A new line was coming. Her lips trembled. "We sent scouts. We prepared the land. We prayed. And then—" Her voice cracked for the first time. "They were born, all three. The elders said it was a blessing, a sign of renewal." Elias listened, not interrupting, not questioning. Whether he believed in spirit-blooded horses didn't matter. He believed in the pain in Lena's voice. He believed in the urgency that clung to every word. But Lena wasn't telling a sacred legend. She was circling something darker. She lifted her head. "Caleb Maddox heard about them before we did." Elias felt a slow burn rise behind his ribs. Maddox, whoever he was, had gotten too close too fast. "How?" Elias asked, keeping his voice steady. "Because someone sold him the rumor," Lena whispered. "A trader passing through our land saw the signs before we realized what they meant. He didn't understand the importance. He only saw profit. Maddox paid him for the location and brought 10 men with him." Her hands curled into fists under the blanket. "We weren't prepared. He came before dawn. Horses surrounded our village, blocking every exit. Maddox walked right into the center camp like he owned the place." Her voice hardened. He said the spirit mares belonged to him, that he'd find them whether we cooperated or not. My uncle tried to stop him. Maddox shot him in front of everyone. The fire popped loudly, echoing the brutality of the moment. We tried to hide the mares, she continued, her words tight and trembling. We moved them into the forest, deeper than anyone usually traveled. But Maddox's men tracked us within hours. They killed 2 mares before we could stop them. The third, the mother of the foals, was wounded. She still ran. She led Maddox away from the village so we could escape with the newborns. Tears welled up in her eyes, but didn't fall. She didn't allow them to. She collapsed during the storm. I tried to protect the foals, but the men found us again. She touched a bruise along her cheekbone, her jaw tightening. They beat me. Maddox said I was in his way, that the mares weren't meant to live free. He wanted their bloodlines to breed a new generation of war horses, stronger, faster, obedient only to him. When he realized the mother was gone and the foals were too small to travel, he left me buried in the snow, assuming I'd be dead within the hour. Her voice fell to a whisper, as fragile as the drifting snow beyond the walls. I thought I would die too. But the foals stayed close to me. Their bodies kept me warm enough to survive until you found us. Elias exhaled slowly. The story had carved a cold pit into his chest. He stared at the dancing firelight, imagining a man bold enough to raid a tribe, shoot an elder, and leave a woman in a blizzard. Elias had spent his life among rough men, ranch hands, rustlers, drifters. But this Maddox was something else entirely. A different breed of cruel. Lena sensed his shift in demeanor. "You need to understand," she said, leaning forward despite her exhaustion. "Caleb Maddox doesn't stop. He doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive. When he sets his mind on something, he destroys anyone standing in the way. And he never leaves a witness." Elias met her gaze steadily. "I don't scare easy. That's not what worries me," Lena replied. "What worries me is that he'll come after you because of me. Because you helped me. He'll see you as part of this now." The truth hung between them. Solid, dangerous, irreversible. Elias rose from his chair, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for the weight of what was coming. "Let him come," he said plainly. "I won't hand you over, and I sure as hell won't let him take those foals." Lena watched him with a mixture of disbelief and something else. Something tender and unsteady. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I didn't know you," Elias corrected. "But I found you fighting to keep 3 newborns alive in the middle of a storm. That tells me everything I need." Her breath caught just slightly. Shock softened into quiet gratitude, and gratitude into a connection neither of them voiced. A fragile pull, a dangerous one, a real one. The cabin shifted with a sudden blast of wind, snow hitting the windows like thrown gravel. The foals whimpered. Elias stood listening. Lena's eyes sharpened instantly, instinct pushing her upright despite her pain. "What is it?" she asked. Elias narrowed his gaze at the door. The storm had grown worse, but there was a rhythm beneath the wind. Hoofbeats, slow, heavy, too deliberate to be wild. Lena's face drained of color. "It's him," she whispered. Elias closed his hand around the handle of his gun. The firelight flickered violently across the room, casting long, trembling shadows. And the truth Lena had spilled so painfully, every wound, every loss, every fear, now tightened into one single, unmistakable fact. Caleb Maddox had already found them. The hoofbeats grew louder, slow at first, then gathering into a rhythm too controlled, too cold to belong to anyone. But a man who believed the night itself bowed to him. Elias moved to the window, careful not to cast a shadow, and peered through the frost-rimmed glass. 4 riders emerged from the blizzard, dark shapes against a world swallowed in white. At the front, a tall man on a black gelding sat straight in the saddle, his coat whipping violently in the wind. Even through the storm's haze, Elias recognized him. Not by face, he'd never seen it, but by presence alone. Caleb Maddox. The man had an aura that seemed to cut through the snow as if nature couldn't touch him. He raised one hand, and the riders behind him fanned out around the ranch yard, forming a loose semicircle, strategically placed, blocking escape, leaving an opening only where they wanted it. Lena clutched the blanket around her shoulders, breath unsteady. But her eyes were sharp with the instinct of someone who had run from this man too many times already. "He won't talk first," she whispered. "He'll act." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then we act faster." He handed her his spare revolver. She hesitated only long enough to accept the reality of what was coming, then closed her fingers around the grip. She was injured, exhausted, barely steady on her feet. But there was no fear in her eyes now, only resolve. The wind slammed against the cabin as a fist pounded on the door. "Carson!" A voice boomed, low and cold as the frozen lake they would later cross. "I know you're in there. We're not here to be patient." Elias stepped forward, gun at his side, but ready. He opened the door just enough to face the man responsible for the bloodshed Lena had described. Caleb Maddox was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark coat dusted with snow, eyes pale and sharp as chipped ice. A cruel smile curved at the edge of his mouth. "You have something of mine." "You're mistaken," Elias said, keeping his voice even. "Nobody here belongs to you." Caleb laughed softly, as if amused by a child misunderstanding the rules of the world. "I'm not talking about the woman, though she's coming with me too. I mean the mares." His gaze slid past Elias toward the barn. "Imagine my surprise, seeing the tracks leading right here. You must think yourself a hero." "I think you should leave," Elias replied. Caleb's smile vanished. "No, I think you should step aside." One of the gunmen shifted in his saddle, waiting for the order. Snow swirled around them like restless spirits caught in a violent dance. Elias didn't move. Caleb leaned forward just slightly. "Last chance, Carson. Step aside and maybe I leave enough of this place standing for you to rebuild. And if I don't?" Caleb's eyes hardened. "Then I burn it." The world paused, only the howl of the storm filling the silence between them. Elias slammed the door shut. Gunfire erupted instantly. Bullets tore through the wooden walls, splintering the air around them. Lena pulled the foals into the far corner behind stacked crates as Elias pushed her lower, shielding her from the barrage. The fire flickered wildly, sparks leaping as if trying to flee. "Barn!" Elias shouted over the thunder of gunfire. "They'll go for the mares first." Lena nodded, pushing herself up with her good arm. "We need to move before they circle." Elias kicked open the back door, and they dashed into the blizzard. Snow stung their faces, the wind slicing through layers of clothing. But the barn, dim, battered, stood only 20 yards away. Elias fired 2 shots into the storm to force the gunmen to scatter, while Lena ran for the barn door. A rifle cracked. A bullet tore past her shoulder, close enough that she felt its heat. She stumbled but kept running. Elias turned, shot the rider who fired at her, and watched the man topple off his horse into the snow. But Maddox didn't flinch. He dismounted with eerie calm. Another shot rang out. The barn wall behind Elias splintered. He shoved Lena inside and slammed the door. The foals were already crying. Frightened, confused. Thunderbolt pawed the dirt floor, snorting sharply, sensing danger closing in from every direction. Elias grabbed the rifle from the wall and checked the window. A torch flew toward the barn. "Down!" he shouted. The torch smashed into the hay pile, flames leaping upward with terrifying speed. Smoke filled the air almost instantly. Lena coughed, pulling a blanket over the foals. "They're trying to flush us out, or burn us alive," Elias muttered. He grabbed a bucket of water, dousing the flames enough to buy seconds, not minutes. The fire was spreading too fast. Gunshots hit the barn doors. A shouted order cut through the storm. Caleb's voice. "Bring me the foals. Kill the cowboy." Elias felt the world narrowing to a single truth. They wouldn't survive by holding the barn. "We're leaving," he said. "Where?" Lena asked. He pointed to the rear wall, where the boards had loosened over years of storms. "Through there." Elias kicked the boards free, creating an opening just wide enough to crawl through. Smoke and heat pressed in as they crawled, pushing the foals ahead in a blanket bundle. Thunderbolt forced through after them with loud, panicked snorts. They emerged into the night just as the barn roof groaned under the weight of flames. But Caleb's men were already circling. Elias pulled Lena behind a snowdrift as bullets peppered the ground around them. Thunderbolt reared up, and Elias seized his reins. "Ride," he said. "Hold on to me." He hoisted Lena onto the saddle behind him and grabbed the bundled foals, securing them between his arms and the saddle horn. The heat of the burning barn silhouetted Caleb Maddox, a dark figure watching them through the firelight. "Carson," he shouted, "you're dead the moment this storm clears." Elias didn't waste breath on a reply. He spurred Thunderbolt hard. The stallion lunged forward, snow exploding beneath his hooves as they plunged into the blizzard's depths. Gunshots chased them into the night, but the storm swallowed sound, swallowed light, swallowed everything except the thundering rhythm of escape. Behind them, Carson Ranch burned. Ahead, the wilderness waited, cold, unforgiving, and vast. But for now, they were alive. Barely. The night swallowed them whole. Snow lashed against Elias's face with needle-sharp force, each gust threatening to rip the breath from his lungs. Thunderbolt plunged ahead with raw instinct, muscles bunching under the weight of 2 riders and the precious bundle of foals pressed between Elias's arms and the saddle horn. Behind them, Carson Ranch crackled and roared in the storm, flames clawing upward like desperate hands, even as the blizzard fought to smother them. Smoke and snow twisted together into a choking gray shroud. Lena clung to Elias's back, her arms trembling around his waist, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Every harsh breath she drew told him she was holding on with the same iron will that had kept her alive in the snowstorm. Elias kept one eye forward, the other watching shadows. The gunmen were fast. Maddox would be faster. Thunderbolt skidded down a slope, hooves scraping ice beneath the fresh snow. Elias kept the stallion steady with firm reins and silent commands. Lightning-quick decisions kept them alive. Veer left to avoid the frozen creek, push forward when the trail narrowed, break through the drift instead of circling it. The storm, brutal as it was, had become both their shield and their curse. Footprints vanished behind them in seconds, but visibility shrank to a claustrophobic tunnel. A shot cracked through the wind. Elias ducked instinctively. Snow burst beside them where the bullet struck. He twisted in the saddle to look back. Through the swirling white, torchlight flickered, dim, wavering, but unmistakably present. "They're gaining," Lena whispered against him. "I know." Thunderbolt snorted hard and pushed faster. The stallion wasn't just running. He was fighting. Fighting the cold, the weight, the unknown terrain ahead. Fighting because Elias asked him to. Fighting because he understood. Elias guided him into the shelter of the tree line, weaving between thick trunks. Branches clawed at their coats, snow dumped down from above in heavy bursts. But it forced the pursuers to slow. Shadows moved behind them, Caleb's men fanning out, voices muffled by the storm. "We won't lose them in the forest," Lena warned, her voice shaking not from fear, but certainty. She knew this man. She knew how he hunted. "We're not trying to lose them," Elias replied. "We're buying time." "For what?" Elias didn't answer yet. because the truth wasn't gentle. It wasn't comforting. It was the kind of truth carved from survival itself. A fallen log forced them to slow before Thunderbolt leapt over it in a spray of snow. Elias kept them angled north, toward the one place he knew Caleb Maddox might underestimate, the lake. The storm thinned suddenly, revealing a faint glow along the horizon. Silver Elk Lake stretched ahead, flat, pale, and shining faintly through the blizzard's veil. A sheet of ice miles wide, deceptively beautiful, lethal beneath the surface. Lena stiffened. "Elias, the ice isn't stable," he finished. "Not in the center, and you're heading straight for it." He tightened his grip on Thunderbolt, jaw clenched. "Caleb wants me alive long enough to talk. That means he'll follow. He always follows." Lena's breath hitched with realization. "You're using yourself as bait." "I'm using his arrogance." Elias glanced back at her. "Hold tight." They burst from the trees and hit the edge of the shoreline. Thunderbolt's hooves struck frozen ground, scattering ice chips. Lena's arms tightened around Elias, trying to steady herself as he guided the stallion onto the lake. The surface groaned. Long, low, warning. Elias kept them toward the edges where the ice was thicker. But even here, the weight of horse and riders made the surface tremble. Behind them, Caleb appeared through the thinning storm, his black coat whipping violently, his gun drawn. His men circled to cut them off, their horses struggling to gain traction on the ice. Caleb's face twisted with fury and triumph. "Carson!" His voice carried unnaturally far. Nowhere left to run. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. He guided Thunderbolt closer to the center, just close enough. The ice beneath them wailed, spiderweb cracks snaking outward like a living thing. Lena gasped. "Elias, stop! We'll fall." "Not if we stay light and keep moving," he murmured. But Caleb won't. As if summoned by the words, Caleb spurred his gelding forward with reckless hunger, charging across the lake. His men hesitated, but Caleb didn't care. He wanted blood. Pride and rage had fused into something blinding. Elias angled Thunderbolt sharply left, letting Caleb close the distance. Maddox fired again. The bullet skimmed past Elias's coat, tearing a line through the fabric. Another struck the ice, a sharp crack ringing beneath them. Thunderbolt lunged forward, and Elias felt the ice shift. Groan, strain. "Now," he whispered, pulling hard and veering back toward the shore, toward solid ice. Caleb didn't realize the trap until the last second. The center of the lake gave way. A massive, thunderous crack split the night. The ice beneath Caleb shattered, collapsing into a jagged maw. Horse and rider plunged downward, swallowed by black water that screamed up like a living force. Caleb's roar cut off as the freezing lake surged over him. His stallion struggled violently, hooves striking ice, water splashing upward in frantic bursts. Caleb clawed at the surface, his pale eyes wide with shock, fury, and disbelief. "Carson!" he bellowed, voice shredded with cold and terror. But the lake was merciless. Another slab of ice snapped and collapsed, dragging horse and rider under. Caleb's outstretched hand, gloved, trembling, was the last thing to vanish before the surface sealed with a muted, final groan. Silence. No struggle, no air. No voice left to threaten them. Only the storm, slowly beginning to die. Thunderbolt slowed, sides heaving from the chase. Elias guided him back to thick ice, then to the snowy bank. Lena slid off the saddle with shaking legs, gripping Elias's arm for balance. The foals cried softly in their blanket, still warm and alive. Lena stared at the lake, chest rising and falling unevenly. "It's over," she whispered. Elias looked out over the frozen expanse, the cracks slowly glazing over, erasing all trace of what had happened. "For now," Lena stepped closer to him, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "He would have killed you." and he would have taken everything from you. Elias replied. I wasn't about to let that happen. For a moment, the world held still. Storm clouds parted just enough for pale moonlight to spill across the snow, faint and cold, but undeniably present. Lena's eyes met Elias's, fear still there, but softened by an unspoken gratitude. Something deeper, something fragile and dangerous in its own way. Thunderbolts snorted softly. The foals shifted, seeking warmth. Elias turned toward the distant mountains. We need shelter, he said. And we need a plan. Lena nodded. And tomorrow, we rebuild. Together, they stepped away from the lake where death had claimed the man who hunted them. Behind them, the storm's fury faded at last, leaving only the quiet breathing of the wilderness and the beginning of something new in its wake. Dawn crept slowly over frozen ridge, the sky blooming with muted shades of rose and pale gold, as if the sun itself hesitated before touching a world still trembling from the night before. Elias and Lena stood side by side on the ridge overlooking what little remained of Carson Ranch. Smoke curled from the blackened skeleton of the barn, the charred beams poking through the snow like broken ribs. The storm had buried much of the destruction under a fresh, deceptively pure layer of white. But it couldn't hide the truth. Their refuge was gone. Thunderbolt stood nearby, coated in frost, head bowed as he nudged one of the foals for reassurance. The 3 spirit mares, small and fragile, yet somehow radiant even in the cold morning light, huddled close to Lena's legs. She wrapped an arm around them, as if shielding them from the memory of the flames themselves. They'll come back, Lena murmured, her breath forming a ghostly cloud in the dawn air. Elias turned to her. Maddox's men scattered last night. Without him, they don't have a leader. They're done. Lena shook her head. They're animals hired by a worse one. Men like that don't vanish because their master fell through ice. They vanish when they have nothing left to gain and nothing left to fear. Elias was quiet for a long moment. He knew she wasn't wrong. Maddox had been a force, but desperate, violent men didn't always die with him. Some held grudges deeper than money. Some hated the idea of failing a man they feared. And some hated the idea of being outsmarted by a single cowboy in the middle of a storm. What do you want to do? Elias finally asked. Lena stared toward the mountains, where the wind carved the horizon into sharp, unforgiving lines. My tribe, what's left of it, is scattered. But the land they protected still exists. The spirit mares belong there. She looked at the foals, her expression softening. They can't grow in hiding. They need open sky, sacred ground, and a people who know how to understand them. Elias studied her profile in the cold morning light. There was an ache in her voice, a longing shaped by grief and duty. But there was strength too, a fire that refused to be extinguished even by loss. You want to go back to Grey Wind territory, Elias said. I need to, Lena corrected, then hesitated. But I can't do it alone. Elias didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted again toward the ranch. His life had been built here, quiet, solitary, predictable, bound to tradition and memory. The land was his past, his present, and until last night, his future. But standing here with Lena, with the foals that shimmered like living myths beneath the sunrise, he felt a shift inside him. Slow, steady, undeniable. He wasn't meant to stay here, not now, not anymore. He looked at Lena, and when she met his gaze, something silent passed between them. An understanding deeper than anything they could put into words. A shared burden, a shared purpose, a shared beginning. I'll help you, he said. Lena exhaled, relief and gratitude softening her shoulders. She stepped closer, almost unconsciously. Thank you. Truly. Thunderbolt raised his head as if in agreement. The foals nudged Lena's legs again, sensing her emotional shift. She knelt and stroked their necks gently, whispering quiet promises in a language Elias didn't know but felt the weight of. Elias moved toward what remained of the barn. He sifted through the snow, uncovering tools, blankets, supplies that had survived the fire. Not much, but enough to travel. "We'll need food," he said over his shoulder, "and shelter along the way. The mountains won't be kind this time of year." "The mountains aren't meant to be kind," Lena replied. "They're meant to be respected." He smiled faintly. Fair enough. They worked in silence for hours, packing saddlebags, tending to the foals, gathering what little they had left. The wind remained steady but gentler than the night before, almost as if granting them passage after witnessing the hell they had endured. By noon, they were ready. Lena lifted one of the foals into her arms. Elias did the same with a second, while the third trotted eagerly after Thunderbolt. They moved slowly, climbing toward the northern pass that led to Grey Wind territory, a place untouched by most travelers, shrouded in myth and memory. As they climbed higher, the world shimmered under sunlight breaking through the clouds. Snow sparkled across the ridge. The air thinned but grew cleaner, sharper, as if they were stepping into something sacred. Lena walked a few paces ahead of Elias, the wind tugging at her hair. There was a quiet determination in her stride now, a purpose that had returned to her with every footstep toward the land of her ancestors. Elias found himself watching her, not with worry, but with a dawning understanding that something between them had shifted during the long night. Something that had grown from shared danger, trust, and the fragile hope they carried in the form of 3 trembling foals. When they reached a sheltered outcrop overlooking a valley of untouched snow, Lena stopped. Elias joined her. Below them lay the Grey Wind lands, vast, wild, and whispering, with the memories of those who had protected it long before either of them were born. "Home," Lena whispered. Elias looked at her, then at the valley, then back again. "For all of us," he said quietly. Lena turned. Her eyes met his and held, not out of desperation or fear, but out of something deeper. A bond forged by survival, by loss, by something neither of them had been able to name before now. Elias reached out, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair from her face. Lena didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his hand, letting it steady her the way it had steadied her throughout the night. Not love, not yet, but something that could grow into it. Something real. Together, they began the descent into the valley. 2 survivors carrying the last hope of a dying legacy, stepping into a future bound by a shared destiny neither had expected. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt wide open. The wind softened as evening settled across the valley, carrying with it the distant whisper of pine and snow. Lena walked slowly, each step measured, almost reverent, as if the ground itself were greeting her return. Elias stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring beside her. The foals pressed between them, small bodies warm and alive, their breaths forming tiny clouds that drifted upward before melting into the fading light. They reached a quiet clearing, a circle of untouched snow, still and sacred. Lena paused, her voice barely above a breath. "This is where the mares were first blessed, generations ago." Her words felt like a prayer. Elias listened, letting the moment unfold, letting the silence settle gently between them like a soft blanket. The sky deepened to violet, stars blinking awake one by one. In that peaceful hush, something inside Lena seemed to loosen, as if the weight of loss finally had room to rest. Elias touched her hand lightly, a simple gesture, yet it held all the steady warmth she needed. She turned toward him, her eyes soft, her smile small but real, and for a brief, quiet moment, surrounded by the sacred breath of the land. They simply stood together. No fear, no fire, no pursuit. Just two souls finding calm after the storm. End of article. Good night.